Hello Year 5. Today's English lesson we are going to be looking at modal verbs. So I have an activity I would like you to do. So have a look at the list opposite and see if you can think of a sentence that uses each of those words. So for example, I can do a handstand. Okay, so there's an example of I can. Pause the video and see if you complete an example for each phrase. Okay, so the words that you looked at on the previous page are what we call modal verbs. So modal verbs work with another verb to be able to describe the likelihood of something happening and the degree of certainty that something is known. So we talk about whether something is going to happen, isn't going to happen, might happen, and we look at the certainty of whether that's going to be the case. For example, one day he might be king. So might be here is one of our modal verb phrases. So modal verb would be might and the infinitive of the verb to be. So might be or to be. So might there is our modal verb. So this suggests to us that it is a possibility that one day that person could become king. But that's not telling us that they will or they won't. It's a potential for the certainty of whether that's going to happen or not. Now, because the modal verb is not the main verb in that sentence, obviously be is going to be our verb in that sentence. This is just known as the modal. So might is just known as a modal. When we add it with might be, that phrase becomes a modal verb. So here are some examples of some of our modal verbs. Can you see any way that you can now organise those modal verbs into smaller groups and think about what they might have in common? Pause this video and see if you can create a little list about how you might organise those words. Let's see how you got on. So this is one possible way that we could organise our modal verbs. So I've managed to split mine into 3 different columns. So let's see if you've got a similar answer. So could, may and might. Now these are words that indicate that something might or might not happen. So this is a degree of certainty of whether it is or isn't going to happen. Would, should and ought to. These words indicate that something needs to happen, but it might not. So someone would need to do this, should need to do this, or ought to do this. So rather than looking at whether it's going to happen or not, this is something that needs to happen, but we again, about the degree of possibility, are looking at whether it's going to happen or not. Now these words here on the end of will, can and must, these are words that are going to integrate a degree of certainty that something will happen. So these are words that's going to suggest that the outcome is going to happen. Did you find any others? Record them down your book and we'll have a look at them when we come back to school. Now, you can also turn those modal verbs into negative verbs as well. For example, you must try the spaghetti. So must is our modal verb. Now, this is a positive, so you must try the spaghetti. If we try to turn this into a negative, we're going to have to use a contraction. So we would have you must not. Now, we can put that together as our contraction of mustn't. So you mustn't try the spaghetti. So we still have must, which is one of our modal verbs, but we have the negative one, which is mustn't. Let's see if you can find the negative forms of these modal verbs. So, number 1, I can do a handstand. Well, what would the opposite of can be? Well, I cannot do a handstand, so I can't do a handstand. We could have an ice cream. What would the opposite be? We could. Well, surely we could not have an ice cream, so we couldn't have an ice cream. It may be sunny tomorrow. May be my modal verb. What's the opposite of it may be? Or well, it may not. May not be sunny tomorrow. This might take a long time. Might is my modal verb. What is the opposite of this might? Well, this must be it might not, so it mightn't take a long time. Let's see if you can apply that knowledge. Pause the video and see if you can write in these sentences, changing the modal verbs to a negative modal verb. So I will take more care next time. I will not. So I won't take more care next time. I would like to leave this place. So this would be I would not, so I wouldn't like to leave this place. You must take a closer look. You must not, mustn't take a closer look. I should really have a holiday. Well, don't we all think that we need a holiday? I shouldn't really have a holiday. I think we would all strongly agree that that's not the case for us, Year 5. I've heard a lot about it. I ought to go there. I've heard a lot about it. I ought not, so I oughtn't to go there. Now that's a tricky one. We don't usually tend to use that contraction, but ought not, again, is our suggestions of that something should happen, but might or might not happen. Well done if you got this all correct, Year 5. What I would like you to do now is I'd like you to work on your own. I'd like you to have a go at completing the sentences with the modal verbs. So the activity sheet, when you look at it, I'd like you to write those sentences down in your book and I'd like you to fill in the missing modal verb. Once you've done that, I'd like you to have a go at the mini test. Now, if you can print this, by all means, you can answer the questions on the sheet. If not, just write down the sentences into your books and complete the questions. Good luck, Year 5.